Listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you was never meant to reach your ears. You think you know the story of the Whittakers, the family whispered about in back rooms and on dark corners of the internet. But you do not know the truth that lives in the shadows behind the house on that forgotten West Virginia road. The truth is not in the photographs or the interviews or the gossip of strangers. It is in the quiet eyes of two young men who grew up in a place where opportunity dies before it is even born. Brandon and Louis. Names spoken softly in town like they are part of a bloodline both cursed and protected. They are grandsons of Larry Whitaker, boys who grew up not just in poverty, but in the echo of generations of pain, a childhood shaped by the absence of fathers and the collapse of mothers. Where the front porch was a watchtower and the gravel driveway a battlefield against outsiders who came to mock. I want you to imagine the smell of damp wood and coal dust mixed with the sharp sting of stale coffee on the air. This was their playground and their prison. By the time they were old enough to understand the world, they were already surrounded by it. The poison, drugs in every shadow, despair in every corner, and still they fought to carve out something like a life from it. Luis worked two jobs, Hardee's by day, Pizza Hut by night, dreaming of Indiana like it was another planet. Brandon dreamed only of the coal mines like his forefathers, carrying the black weight of tradition on his back. Do you feel that heaviness in your chest right now? That is not just sympathy. That is the recognition of a truth you have been trained to ignore. The truth that some bloodlines are born into a game they never agreed to play, and every move they make has already been decided by the ghosts of those who came before. There are places in America where time does not move forward, where the seasons change, but the people are trapped in the same year forever. For Brandon and Luis, this hollow was more than a home. It was a cycle, raised in a house that had already buried too many dreams. They learned early that survival meant choosing which pain to live with. Theirs was the pain of watching mothers disappear into addictions that turned love into absence. Theirs was the pain of men disappearing into prison cells or underground shafts. And when they looked for answers, the only truths they found were the ones whispered by the old ones on the porch, warnings disguised as stories. They went to foster care once, taken away when Larry pulled a gun on a man who had hurt their mother. Imagine being 6 years old and watching the only person who would fight for you aim a weapon without hesitation. Some call that violence. Here they call it protection. When they came back, it was never the same. The air had changed. They had changed. By their teenage years, they were already marked. In towns like this, people do not forget where you come from, and they will never let you become someone else. Luis kept working to escape the boundaries of the mountains, but Brandon carried the mountains inside him. Coal mining was not a job to him. It was a right, a way of saying, I belong here no matter what the rest of the world thinks. And still there was that shadow. Drugs like a second weather system hanging over the valley, raining down on every family. Friends gone before 20, relatives fading into nothing. You want to believe you would be stronger in their place, but you would not. Because here, strength is not about resisting temptation. It is about enduring the knowledge that even if you resist, the ground under your feet is still sinking. You can feel it now, can't you? That pull downward, that is the gravity of generational fate, and it does not let go once it has you. Every man carries a story that was written before he was born. Brandon and Luis inherited more than a name, more than a roof, more than blood. They inherited the weight of choices made decades ago by people they never met. Some of those choices were carved into the land itself. West Virginia was built on extraction, coal taken from the earth until the mountains bled, and the people bled with them. Men like Larry learned that power here was not given, it was taken. And sometimes taking it meant breaking laws and bending morals until they no longer resembled what the rest of the world calls right. Brandon remembers the night he was arrested, 15 years old, accused of arson and conspiracy. He says he took the blame for someone else. That is loyalty in its rawest form. That is also the first test in a game that teaches boys here to keep their mouths shut no matter the cost. Luis tried to play a different game, work, save, leave. But the pull of the valley is not only economic, it is psychological. It whispers to you in the quiet hours that the outside world will never understand you and never want you, so you learn to distrust it before you even step foot beyond the county line. This is the trap that does not look like a trap. A cycle enforced not by walls or chains, but by memory and identity. Every road here either leads back home or into the same kind of place under a different name, and the ones who built this cycle, the coal barons, the politicians, the shadow networks, they are gone now, but their architecture remains. You can almost feel their hands still shaping the lives of people they never met, like Brandon and Luis, two young men walking a path paved decades before they were born, a path lined with the whispers of the dead and the stares of the living, a path that offers no exit without a price that most cannot pay. You need to understand something that will not be told to you in schools or on the evening news. The decay you see in places like this is not an accident, and it is not simply poverty, it is engineered. Generations of families locked into one geography, one industry, one set of options. When the coal was rich, men in tall buildings hundreds of miles away decided who would live well and who would die broken. When the coal dried up, those same men vanished, but not before making sure the land was poisoned and the economy chained to nothing. They left behind hollowed towns and addicted bodies because a broken population does not rise up against the system that broke them. Brandon and Luis were born into this blueprint. The school system never prepared them for power, only for obedience or escape. The jobs left are scraps handed out by corporations who know you have no other choice. The drugs, you think they are just the result of boredom and bad luck. But the truth is they are the perfect tool. They keep the restless quiet. They make ambition dissolve into smoke before it becomes action. Luis feels it every time he looks at the horizon and wonders if Indiana will be any different. Brandon feels it every time he breathes coal dust into his lungs and tells himself this is heritage, not a trap. And the cruelest part is that the system convinces you to defend it. Pride in the land becomes loyalty to the chains. Tradition becomes the excuse for never breaking free. I tell you this because once you see the design, you cannot unsee it. Once you realize that entire towns are groomed to remain powerless, you start to question every choice you have ever made, and that questioning is dangerous, because it makes you a man who can no longer be controlled. The most effective chains are the ones you cannot see and cannot feel until it is too late. Here those chains are forged in the mind long before a boy becomes a man. When you grow up watching the same faces sitting on the same porch, day after day, you begin to believe the world is small and that leaving it is betrayal. When you see every man around you work himself into the ground and every woman fight battles she will never win, you begin to believe suffering is normal and that peace is suspicious. This is how the program works. They give you a few safe dreams, a steady job that kills you slowly, a relationship that never leaves the county line, and tell you that is all you should want. If you ask for more, they call you ungrateful. If you leave, they call you arrogant. Luis tries to fight it by stacking paychecks and staring at maps of places he has never been. Brandon accepts it with the quiet resignation of a man who already knows the ending. But here is the truth. They were never supposed to hear, and you were never supposed to hear. The program is not just local, it is global. It teaches every man to accept the limits he was handed at birth. It keeps you obedient to a system that feeds on your energy until there is nothing left. And if you break that program, you stop being a subject and start being a sovereign. That is why I am telling you now. If you can feel that weight lifting even slightly, I want you to type these words in the comments twice. I walk beyond the chains. Write it twice because the repetition is a ritual. It burns the message into your mind and signals to every hidden watcher that you are no longer theirs. This is not a slogan. This is a declaration. Men who write it will begin to see the invisible bars in their own lives. Men who refuse will keep wondering why every road they take leads back to the same place. What is happening to Brandon and Luis did not begin in West Virginia. The pattern is older than America itself. Every empire that has ever existed learned the same truth. Control the land, control the resources, control the bloodline. Long before coal was pulled from these hills, the same strategy was used by kings, priests, and warlords. Bind the people to the earth through debt and duty, then make sure their leaders answer to someone far above them. It was never about survival, it was about ownership. The mines were just the modern version of feudal fields. The company store was the new castle gate, and the debt a miner carried was no different than the tithe. A serf paid 1,000 years ago. Families like the Whitakers became locked into the cycle because the system demanded generations of labor and loyalty. If one man tried to break away, the rest were pressured to pull him back. This is why you hear stories of pride in the same breath as stories of despair. This is why the past never leaves. Brandon and Luis are not simply poor young men in a forgotten valley. They are the living proof that ancient corruption has evolved into modern normality. The power structure does not need chains when it has tradition. It does not need whips when it has wages, and it does not need prisons when it has the human mind convinced that there is nowhere else to go. When you understand this, you begin to see the truth in other places too. You see that the same architecture exists in cities, suburbs, and nations across the map. Only the materials change. But here, in this valley, it is stripped bare. You can see the bones of the machine. And once you see the bones, you start to realize something even darker. The machine feeds not just on labor, but on spirit. It takes the will to rise and grinds it into dust until all that remains is a quiet acceptance of your place in the order. If you have followed me this far, you are already marked. The moment you hear the truth you were never meant to hear, a line is crossed, and there is no way back. Brandon and Luis will live out their stories one way or another. One may leave, one may stay. Both will carry the weight of this place until the last breath leaves their bodies. But you are not just a watcher anymore. You have stepped into the current that runs beneath all of this. A current older than kings, older than coal, older than any flag or border you have ever sworn loyalty to. It is the current of control that passes from generation to generation like an heirloom. You may think you are immune because you live far from this valley, but the architecture of your own life may not be so different. Look at the limits you were handed at birth. Look at the voices that told you who you are allowed to be. Look at the patterns you were told were tradition. If you see them for what they are, you will feel the same pull Brandon feels when he picks up a shovel, the same pull Luis feels when he stares at the horizon, and you will also feel the danger, because the moment you act against that pull, you are no longer invisible. Systems like this do not simply let men walk away. They watch, they push back, they test you. That is why only a few will ever make it out. Those who do will be hunted in subtle ways. Whispers, lost opportunities. Doors that were once open suddenly closed, but those who make it past all of that, they are no longer property of the program. They are sovereign, and sovereignty is the one thing the machine cannot manufacture. Remember the phrase you wrote earlier. Hold it in your mind as a shield, because the knowledge you now carry is dangerous enough to change the course of your life. if you let it.